Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our Environmental Learning Centers of Connecticut and our 10 a.m. live stream. Today we are with the Crested Gecko, whose name is Petrie. Crested geckos are reptiles, so their body is covered with soft scales. He will shed his scales. He's pretty much done growing, so he won't shed his scales to grow anymore, but he still sheds his scales to keep healthy. Another attribute of being a reptile is that this animal has a backbone. But this crested gecko gets its name because right under its eyes and over its eyes, they have these long, they almost look like eyelashes. Those little spines, they're actually not so pokey. They're very soft, but those give the crested gecko its name, crested. This is not an animal that we would find in Connecticut. We only have one native lizard in Connecticut. We do have a couple of other reptiles, turtles and snakes, but we only have one lizard, the five-lined skink. So this crested gecko is found across the world. If we were going to locate this gecko out in the wild, we would have to go off the eastern coast of Australia, where they are in New Caledonia, an island, with a lot of variety of gecko species. So these guys out in the wild, they're going to be eating fruit, insects, flowers. Here in captivity, we're also feeding them insects, so we'll feed them roaches and crickets. But then we also give them almost like a fruit smoothie to give them all the nutrients that they need. One unique feature of this gecko is that they do not have eyelids. So this gecko, to keep their eyes nice and moist, they will actually lick their eyeballs. That also cleans them. They are primarily nocturnal. You'll see the pupil right now is a very thin line. So that vertical pupil is very thin to kind of make it so he does not take in a lot of light. When his pupil in the middle of the night, when his pupil will become more large, and that will help him bring in more light into his eye. But right now it's kind of bright for him, so he's closing his pupil to make it very, very thin, so it's not as bright on him. His name is Petrie. That's a question for Marissa. Another awesome feature of geckos is their feet. So those feet are they're not sticky to the touch, but it's kind of like he has little hairs on his toes that will help bond to whatever surface he is climbing on. So our gecko here can climb up the glass, can climb up the wall, For our friends just joining us, Andrew and Grace, this is a crested gecko found on an island off the coast of Australia. They have a pretty long lifespan. In captivity, they can live up to 20 years. So if you're going to have them as a pet, which you can have, they are a long commitment. They like humidity, so these guys we usually spray down every single morning, every single evening. They won't drink standing, they often won't drink standing water. So he likes to drink droplets of water from the glass as they fall down the glass after we spray it. He'll drink it from the glass, or he'll drink it from his plant as the moisture gathers on the plant leaves. Out in the wild, they do have to deal with predators. Larger geckos will try to eat them, especially as babies. When they're babies, they're small. They're going to be about the size of your thumb. Now, as an adult, including the tail, he's about 7 or 8 inches long. So they do grow to a pretty large size compared to when they were a baby. Birds will also eat geckos. His tail is really interesting because in one adaptation they have from their predators is that they will drop their tail. And this gecko species, the crested gecko, once they drop that tail, it will never regrow. So some other geckos, like the leopard gecko, for example, they can regrow their tail. The crested gecko cannot. Once it's gone, it's gone. And the goal of that is so if a predator grabs the gecko, they drop their tail, and hopefully it will be a distraction for the predator. It'll wiggle once it drops and it hits the ground. It will still continue to wiggle. It'll look like a worm, and hopefully that will distract the predator enough for the gecko to run away. And here we can see he's climbing the glass wall really easily. Even going upside down. The crested geckos can be different colors. So Petrie here is kind of a tan yellow color, but they can be spotted. He has a few spots on him. They can be spotted, they can be striped, they can be red, they can be dirt brown, they can be also a light, almost white color. So there is quite a variety. And geckos, these crested geckos, are known for making themselves lighter or darker depending on how they're feeling. Not on me. There we go. So our gecko here, if he's really excited or his mood is changing, he's excited, he's warm, he might be darker. If he's asleep per se, he's going to be lighter in color. So these guys are what we call arboreal geckos. They're arboreal. And what arboreal means is they like to live high up in the trees. So this is an animal that they can climb down and be on the ground, but more often than not, they're going to be up in the trees on the tree branches. So they're an animal that primarily lives up off of the ground where they can be away from predators on the ground, such as snakes that might come after them. But they also are known in captivity for digging holes, so they can dig holes. They'll come and dig in moss when they're ready to lay eggs, so they are a reptile that lays eggs. They don't give live birth. Males will be slightly larger than females. So we can see all those kind of bumps on his back, those scales. When he sheds his scales, he will actually eat his scales that he sheds. And there's a couple reasons for that. The scales that they shed, they want to eat one for a nutrients boost. It has calcium in it, so they're going to get a boost of calcium. But then they're also going to be hiding the evidence of where they are. So they don't want any predators knowing where they're hanging out. So if they eat the evidence that they're leaving behind, predators are going to be less likely to find him. The tail, we have a question, why is the tail two different colors? That's just some variation, some individual variation, excuse me, on the tail and why there's different colors. He does live alone, so this is a reptile that if you're going to own as a pet, they're best kept individual, especially if you have two males. Two males will become territorial. If you have a male and female, they most likely will breed. He's moving pretty slow right now, but they can move much faster. He's very calm. He's not worried that I'm a predator trying to eat him, so he's just kind of moseying around, but they are an animal that can scurry if need be. They can jump. They're not very graceful. They kind of do these big belly flops. But they can jump. That's how they go from branch to branch in the trees. We have a question from Katie on if we ever put Petrie on our shoulder. We do take him out. We let him exercise. We kind of do ladder climbs on our hands so he can climb and exercise. He can go on our shoulders, but he is a jumper. So just for safety for the video, we're going to keep him in the cage so he does not launch himself, because he's not very graceful. Crested geckos, they like warmth. As a pet, they thrive on room temperature, so they can be at room temperature. They can go up to about 74, 75 degrees, but they do not thrive when it gets much hotter than that. They cannot survive well at higher temperatures for long amounts of time. So if you're keeping one as a pet and you tend to have a colder house, you can give them a little heat through a heat bulb, but generally they do well at room temperature. In captivity, we tend to have a lot of different colors of the crested geckos, almost like designer colors. Well, people will breed the geckos for certain patterns. Out in the wild, they're most likely going to have colors that resemble Petrie here, more plain in color, just so they can hide while they're climbing in the trees and avoid those predators. One sign that tells us Petrie is a male is that he also has a large head. So they kind of got these wedge-shaped heads. Males will have slightly larger wedge heads than the females. Petrie does have a specific diet. He gets insects, so we feed him crickets, and a powder that we add water to. It ends up being like a fruit smoothie. Out in the wild, they're going to be eating fruits, insects, and flowers. And if you've kept your eye on his eyes, you'll notice he still has not blinked because he does not have eyelids. We have a question from Marissa wondering how old Petrie is. He is about 6 years old. So in captivity, they can live up to 20 years. In the wild, since they're dealing with challenges such as finding food, water, and shelter, and they're dealing with predators, they might have a shorter lifespan. There he goes. There he's licking his eye to keep it nice and moist and clean. You can also see his nostrils on the tip of his nose, so he can smell. They can yawn, and they can also bite. So he doesn't really have teeth, but their jaws are strong that if need be, he can bite to protect himself. But more often than not, if he encounters a predator out in the wild, if we're talking about a wild crested gecko, he will either jump away, drop his tail, and as a last resort, bite if they're too close for comfort. Right, so that's a little bit about our crested gecko Petrie for this morning. We're going to be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. on our Facebook Live on the Environmental Learning Centers of Connecticut, our Facebook page. So if you have any other questions or comments, or if you would like us to cover a specific environmental topic, you can comment below and we'll be sure to cover it for you. But from all of us, all of our reptiles and amphibians coming to you from the Indian Rock Nature Preserve, we'll see you tomorrow.